record onto cloud. Great. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, so going ahead and moving on here to the E in the PESO model, which is earned media. So again, you guys have heard this countless times in your other classes, in my class. This is essentially when we try to convince reporters or people who have access to a large amount of folks to cover our client, to talk about our company, to cover a product that we sell, for instance. And the reason why it's earned is because we're not paying these journalists to write a newspaper article about our client or about the business that we work for. We essentially earn this media through the form of what we call pitching. So pitching is essentially when you email or send a tweet to a journalist and you convey the news value of this, potential story that you want to be featured about your client. And so that's why I put here, like, media relations is so important when we're trying to engage in earned media. And not just media relations as it relates to like newspaper or news reporters or editors. It's also social media influencers, right? So you have to have some type of rapport with these influencers. You can't just go out to someone and say, hey, you should cover my client. Well, what's in it for them? What's the news value? What's the benefit for them as well? So in terms of using the news media as your mouthpiece, like I like to say, there's a lot of credibility there. And what I mean by that is if you compare it to an advertisement, there's typically more perceived credibility or more credibility assigned to that news article as opposed to a traditional advertisement. Also, just like traditional advertising, we can potentially reach a lot of people if you think about newspaper publications, for instance. Now, there are some limitations to this as well. So typically what we see, especially with new businesses, for instance, they get a lot of coverage at the very beginning of their business or when their business, just open. And then I would say about 3 to 5 months later, they're no longer in the news anymore, right? So how do we sustain that longevity or that long-term media coverage? How do we pitch creative story ideas that isn't just about the fact that we're the new kid on the block? And that's where that creativity comes into play a lot with pitching, making sure that your client is doing things that are newsworthy, and also making sure that you're developing that rapport with that journalist so that in the event that you do want to use earned media in a campaign, you can do that easily, or at least more easily than you would reaching out to a reporter that you don't know. And then also with earned media, you're running a risk a little bit. And what I mean by that is you can't control what a reporter ultimately is going to say about your client. They have control over the layout and the feel and the tone that they're using in their article. So just keep that in mind as well. Even though we can pitch a story idea to them and we can send them a press release, at the end of the day, what's going to happen is they have control over that media content. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the chat here just to make sure that we're all doing okay. Let's see here. The definition of PESO since, oh yes, sorry, Olivia. Yep, I can go ahead and go back to the definition of the PESO model. Yep, so if you are watching this recording later on in the day, I had some technical difficulties. I completely forgot to record the very beginning. So again, we're here talking about the PESO model, which stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned media. And this is essentially the model that we use to figure out what types of media that we can use in a public relations campaign. And even though the acronym is in the order of PESO, because it's easy to remember, in actuality, we kind of use it, or we start first with owned media, then earned, shared, and then paid media. Sorry about that. I think we have some other folks here in the chat. Okay. All right, I think we're all good to go. All right, so kind of elaborating more on media relations and how to engage in that to kind of enhance your earned media aspect of your campaign. It's so important that you understand I guess you can say, the type of coverage that's related to that newspaper, that's related to that magazine. You want to make sure whatever you're pitching, the story idea, for instance, that it's in line with that reporter's beat. The beat is basically the topic, the typical topics that a reporter covers. And it's not enough sometimes just to reach out to a reporter, again, making sure that you emphasize that news value in your pitch. And also emphasizing why would, for example, dispatch readers be interested in the story that's about your clients. So making sure that you have strong news judgment. And that's why, honestly, we talk about news judgment in some of your other communication classes. Even though you might not want to be a reporter, if you want to go into PR and to a certain degree marketing as well, you're going to be dealing with reporters on a relatively regular basis. So understanding how they're approaching this media process will definitely enhance your overall campaign strategy as well, especially if you're using a media relations strategy. Strategic pitching, and what I mean by that, and again, I hate to sound repetitive here, but for those who are taking some of my other classes, I tell students, do not do what we call spray and pray. So that's basically when a publicist will send out the same pitch to as many reporters as possible, praying that someone will eventually email them back. The reason why you don't want to do that is, number one, it makes you look desperate. So you don't want to be that desperate publicist. And also you want to make sure your story article, your story pitch is in line with the journalist who's covering that particular topic. So for instance, if I'm the publicist for Hot Chicken Takeover, I'm not going to pitch my news story idea to a reporter who's in crime, for instance, or a crime reporter. So just making sure that we understand who we're pitching to, why we're pitching to that person, and how it'll benefit that overall news organization and their audience. Any questions about strategic pitching at all? Okay. And then my last point here, just be very conscious about the fact that when you're pitching to perhaps a newspaper, it's going to be very different from broadcast. So again, going back to the restaurant example, if I wanted to do a cooking demonstration, right? I'm not going to pitch to a newspaper. I'm probably going to pitch to 10 TV, who can maybe visually convey, something unique about the product, the food that I'm selling, that maybe a feature article wouldn't be able to convey in a newspaper. So that's media relations, strategic pitching, earned media. Questions at all over that? Okay. And I'm sorry, just one more thing as it relates to media relations. Another thing we do in earned media is to prep our client for any interview that they might have with a reporter. There tends to be a lot of anxiety when we are trying to prepare for an interview with a reporter. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're scared that we might misrepresent our brand. And also some of us have had poor experiences with reporters where they will use a quote that maybe isn't what we said word for word. And so with that being said, these are just some concrete tips that you guys can use to basically help your client out if they are preparing for an interview with a media organization. So it goes without saying that you definitely need to understand, why is this interview taking place? Is it just to enhance brand awareness? Is it to update the public about a crisis that's going on? So again, understanding the goal and the purpose, the objective of the story goes a long way. Also email, or I should say, ask for some of the interview questions in advance. I argue that if a reporter doesn't send at least a few of those questions in advance, they refuse to, then honestly, I would do an interview with another reporter. I don't understand why a reporter can't give you at least one question that'll help you to kind of formulate your interview responses. And speaking of responses, make sure that you kind of help your client to develop what we call like core messaging. So basically develop narratives, be able to, talk about stories that'll really help to answer some of those questions that the reporter is asking. So again, make sure that they're on message, that they're on the brand message, I should say, so that they don't misrepresent the company in some capacity. And I see I have a question here. Oh, no, not a question, just someone who needs to be admitted. All right, so that is earned media. All right, so we're about halfway there. Then we have shared media. I love this definition of shared media through Adweek. I subscribe to them. It's not Ad Age, Adweek. So it's the documented engagement between a brand and a user, where the engagement is on basically both ends. And at the same time, the media type is not fully owned by either group. So I think a great example of that is social media. And what I more specifically mean by that is Ohio State has been tweeting out a lot about the fact that we're transitioning to remote learning. But you as a Twitter user, you can retweet that, and you can even do what we call quote retweet, and retweet not only that original tweet, but also your opinion about it in that retweet with a comment. So that's shared media, where again, the user can generate content on that post that that organization created initially. So the enhanced interaction between your key publics, it enhances the reach, right? Because if we're retweeting things, if we're sharing things with our, family, with our friends, with our Twitter followers, with people who are on Instagram, again, that enhances the reach of our communications here. There are some limitations to that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and see if anyone can identify some limitations to shared media. And again, you guys can just type that in the chat. What are some limitations to shared media? Or you can unmute if you want to. Any limitations at all? I agree. So Olivia put the organization might be limited to their existing audience. Yep. So again, if I'm trying to share out content on my Facebook page, typically it's only going to go to the folks who have liked my Facebook page. Yeah, so Aaron kind of said the same thing. So not being able to reach certain audiences depending upon the platform. So Instagram, for instance, tends to have a younger demographic compared to, for example, Facebook. John, yeah, that's a really good one, John. So John said that the organization essentially can't control what the other side is communicating about. That's a really, really huge limitation of shared media. So I can post something on behalf of Ohio State, but I cannot control what someone's going to retweet with the comment. I cannot control the comments that are underneath that post. So that's where it gets a little, I guess you can say, precarious, but you have to do what's called a risk analysis. So do the pros outweigh the cons? And of course, making sure that your content, especially your social media content, is looked at by a variety of people in the event that, they can check for something that might offend some people. Allie put, not everyone uses social media. Absolutely. Right. So I do want to kind of pause here because I think since I'm using a lot of social media examples, you guys might think shared media is only social media. Another example of shared media can be partnerships, right? So actual events where you have two organizations coming together and for whatever reason. It could be a grand opening. It could be for some type of feel-good charity. So that would also be an example of shared media. And the reason why it can be media is both organizations, at least ideally speaking, they would both promote that event. So it's not just shared media, or I'm sorry, it's not just social media, even though social media is a very popular type of shared media. Yep, Aaron, can't control the content that other people attach to your content. Yes, very good. All right. Any questions over that? All right. So we've already discussed this first point here, user-generated content that can be beneficial because again, it could potentially enhance the reach of your content, but it's uncontrolled. We cannot have control over what people are going to say about our posts, for instance. We can't control how people are going to react more broadly to our shared media, whether that's social media or some type of shared partnership. And then another thing that you guys might want to do if you're thinking about using shared media in your own campaign proposal, a really easy way to do that is through social media influencing or influencer marketing. That tends to be also a very popular way to engage in shared media as well. So some pros and cons to this. We've already talked about how for the most part it enhances our reach. But also, if you think about it, it's a really easy way to develop that rapport with your key audiences and audiences that you haven't really interacted with. So again, going back to that reach. But of course, we cannot control what people are saying about us, especially in light of social media. And my last point here, I just have some examples. Can you guys think of other examples that perhaps I haven't mentioned? So I've mentioned a lot of social media sharing, tagging businesses, shared events, partnerships, anything else that maybe you guys can think of, shared media that perhaps you've done in your own internship or work experience, or you've seen it all? Let's see here. Yep, so Erin put here trends and hashtags. Olivia, can you elaborate a little bit more on flyering, like for a partnership? Is that what you mean? Or can you elaborate a little bit on that? And while she's doing that, what I'd like to do is share with you guys examples. Sorry, I'm not sure what's going on with my PowerPoint. Examples of shared media. Again, this is another social media example, but we can see it here. Sharing is being paused. Oh gosh, hold on one second, guys. Okay. Okay, great. I'm about to share this with you guys. All right, so for those who are foodies like me, you are probably well aware of some of the partnerships that take place across restaurants here in the Columbus area. So before everything has happened with COVID-19, Hot Chicken Takeover and Mikey's Late Night Slice, they team up every single year. I think this has been their 5th year. They team up and they make a pizza that basically combines the late night slice ingredients with Hot Chicken Takeover. And so this is a great example of shared media because essentially, number one, this is a partnership. Number two, they're posting this not only on their own social media, their Instagram, but also you can see here, it's posted on Mikey's Late Night Slice as well. So again, it enhances the reach. It also enhances engagement across followers, not only the followers at Late Night Slice, but also Hot Chicken Takeover as well. They're tagging each other, mentioning each other on each other's, in their own, I should say, stories. So again, this can be extremely beneficial from a communication standpoint. Any questions at all over that? Yep, and Olivia, I got some clarification on that. Yes, you are absolutely correct. Very good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let's see here. Oops, I do not want to leave the meeting. New share. They don't make it very easy to share multiple screens here on Zoom, but I'll figure it out. All right, so the last category in the PESO model, owned media. Remember, however, this is typically the first place that we start in the PESO model in a communication process or in a communication campaign. So owned media kind of is what it sounds like. So this is content communication that the client or the business creates. They can control the layout, the feel, the tone, the words, messaging, all that. So it's highly controlled for the most part. So their own social media accounts, for instance, so whatever they are posting, not necessarily the comments from social media users. Newsletters, for example. MailChimp is a platform I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with that organizations use for internal communications and external communications, but they use it a lot for newsletters. Any type of blog that's associated with your company, that'll also be an example of owned media. That organization's website, let's see what else, an annual report. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys some more examples of owned media. Let's see, gotta do a new share here. Oops. Actually, I think I'm just gonna skip that because I need to figure out the the ease in going back between different screens here. But basically what I was gonna show you guys is an example of a newsletter, the data that you see on the back end in MailChimp. What I can maybe do is send you guys screenshots of that, and then a sample annual report from the Ronald McDonald House as well. So some obvious benefits to this, or one of the major benefits to this, is that unlike shared media, unlike earned media, we can have complete control over the feel and tone and the content creation process. So that's a huge win for us from the client standpoint, and also if we're helping the client to create that content from a PR standpoint as well. However, for the most part, if we're creating that content and only putting it on, for example, our own website, or only putting it on our own social media accounts, it limits the amount of people that we can essentially reach out to. So these are just some limitations to consider if you're thinking about owned media in your own campaign proposal. Questions over owned media? No? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So I am going to guess, as I was lecturing, many of you guys were probably thinking, well, social media can be both owned and shared. Or for example, an advertisement, depending upon the nature of the advertisement, can be paid and shared. So yes, you're absolutely right. Even though I went through lecture now in a very like linear fashion, like these are examples of paid media, owned media, shared media, and what have you, and earned media. A media type or media example can intersect with other different categories within that PESO model. So I don't want you guys to think that, for example, a press release is just earned media. It's actually earned media and owned media. And that is on my next slide here. So the reason why, for example, a press release is both owned and earned, it's owned because the publicist for that company is going to create that content. They essentially can have control over the content creation process with that press release. However, they're using that press release to engage in media relations, to earn media coverage, essentially. So that's how, with some of these media types that I've explained here, they can definitely be multiple categories or multiple types within that PESO model. Native advertising. So some of you guys might have heard of this in your other class. So native advertising is essentially when you have an ad that reflects the feel, the tone of that media type that it lives in. So a great example of that, and I actually might post this as well, is sometimes you'll read, for example, Forbes magazine, and you're reading a traditional newspaper article or magazine article, but in reality, it was actually written by someone who works for a business for paid promotional reasons. So let's say that I work for Ohio State, for instance, and I want to talk about this new cool program at Ohio State. I could pay Forbes, right? Ideally speaking, I could pay them so that I can write the article about Ohio State. So there's some ethical situations going on there with native advertising. Some people think it's really cool. Other folks are like, well, that's an advertisement, but a lot of folks don't know that it is in fact an advertisement. So that'll be a great example of how native advertising, for instance, is paid and owned at the same time. All right, and then my last few slides here, I just want to let you guys know when is it appropriate to use specific media types. So for example, with earned media, if you want to enhance the credibility of that coverage or the credibility of your client, I think, yeah, that's definitely the way to go. Owned media is very, very useful for internal publics. And what I mean by that is if you want to inform your publics about something that's going on in your company, whether that is something related to COVID-19 or a new CEO, owned media is probably the best for that. Shared media, if you want to enhance your market outreach, if you want to enhance who you're specifically speaking to. Shared, and I would say a little bit of earned media as well, combined in your campaign is probably the best way to go about that. And I know a lot of you guys in your campaign proposal, you want to use, or your goal, excuse me, is to reach out to different demographics. So pay close attention to this because again, if that is your goal, I strongly recommend that you're using both earned and shared media in some capacity because that's the easiest way to accomplish that goal. And then paid media is essentially really cool to just capturing the attention of folks who might not be well aware of your brand. All right, so this is the last slide here. This is a more, I guess you can say, intense PESO model. It's more detailed. That's a better way of saying it. I love this model that Jeannie created because it gives you guys specific examples of media types that fall within the various different categories of the PESO model. So some examples that I didn't even discuss in class today. So definitely I'll post this on Canvas right after lecture along with this recording. Make sure you guys take a look at it because on the exam I will ask you guys for examples of paid media, for instance, shared media, whether or not a specific example can be both earned and owned, for instance. So take a look at that. I'm gonna go ahead and pause here because I have something in the chat. Yes, previous slide. Yes, I sure can. Oops. And trying to figure out if there's anything else that maybe would be helpful to this lecture. I also don't want you guys to feel like in your own campaign that you have to use each of the media types in the PESO model. If you just want to use owned media, for example, in your campaign, that's fine, as long as it makes sense in light of whatever you're trying to accomplish for the client. And that goes, you know, in general, not just for this class. If you guys are interested in marketing and public relations after Ohio State, you're not limited to, you know, just using one, or you don't have to use all the various different media types. There is no rule that says the more media types within this PESO model you use, the better your campaign will be. It's very, very situational. It just depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the chat. Yes, yes, John, I will be leaving the slides up for the entire semester, all the recordings, everything's going to be available to you guys. Also the slides from after, let me see, after exam 1. So anything that I've covered after exam 1 until the end of the semester, I will post that as well. So I think I talked about market research, strategies, campaign messaging, now the PESO model, and then evaluator research. So all that stuff will be available to you guys. Any other questions that maybe I can answer? There's no quiz or exam over that content. Will exam 2 just cover what we learn in lecture? Yes, so exam 2, just to kind of clarify, exam 2 is going to cover any content that we covered after exam 1. So that includes, so it's not cumulative. No, it's definitely not cumulative. So that includes the lecture over market research, the lecture over strategies, also, I believe objective statements as well, because we only kind of talked about goal statements a little bit. So yes, objective statements, strategies, market research. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? Yes, campaign messaging, the PESO model, and then evaluative research. Libby, will there be a study guide for exam 2? Yes, absolutely. That is my plan to post that as well later on today. So yep, you guys will definitely have an exam, or I'm sorry, a study guide. Will the exam just cover what we learned in lecture? Will we still have to go over things in book? That's a great question, Aaron. So Aaron asked, because I kind of just mumbled through that, will exam 2 just cover what I explained in lecture, or do you guys also have to use the book? I think for the most part, since I'm redesigning the exam in light of what we're going through, for the most part, if you just rely on your lecture notes, you should be fine. I think the book, however, will give you guys not better examples, more examples that you guys can use to make sure that you're actually understanding the concepts. And I will hold a more formal exam review as well on, let's say Monday, on Wednesday. But again, just like how it is in class or in person, if you guys don't come with questions, I'm going to assume that you are okay, even though you're probably not during this time. So if you don't have questions, then what I will also do is create a discussion post. It's not graded, but basically like you guys can ask questions about the exam on Canvas so that other people can see what people are asking about. And again, that'll be posted probably on Wednesday. All right, do you suggest rewatching videos for further study? Yes, Kerrigan, absolutely. And hopefully, this video was a little shaky, to be honest with you, but I expected that. Hopefully on Wednesday's class, it'll be a little bit better in terms of me explaining certain things. But yeah, watching the videos definitely help for studying for this exam. And then John asked, I know you mentioned this in the video, but will we be taking exam 2 during class time? Correct, it will not be up all day. Actually, no, so I changed this and I apologize if I did not clarify this well enough. So you have the entire day on next Monday to take exam 2. So it'll be open at midnight, Monday, March 30th, and it'll close at 11:59 p.m. Now I know, sorry, my dog is like snoring. Can you guys hear that? I know earlier I had posted the announcement that talking about some of my grace periods with the assignment. That does not apply to the exam, especially since you have literally all day to take it. So if you don't take the exam by 11:59 p.m. next Monday, it's a 0. So again, make sure you guys put a reminder in your phone. And again, you can take it at any point in time in the day on Monday. It doesn't have to be between 10:30 and 12:30 or 10:30 and noon. Let's see, hold on one second. Oops, goodness gracious. Going back to the chat here. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think that concludes today's lecture. Thank you guys so much. You guys are so awesome sticking with me. I know some of you guys are like, Jasmine does not know technology. But like I said, I figured this would happen in today's lecture. The same situation will take place on Wednesday. So if you would like to attend the live lecture on Wednesday at 10:30, just use the link that I provide on the module section, this week's module section, to tune into that. All right, guys, take care.